Beginning in early 2024, global defense analysts witnessed a quiet but decisive shift in India's military aviation strategy. A shift that would eventually echo across Moscow, rattle the Kremlin, and send shockwaves through every major weapons manufacturer watching the Indo-Pacific. For decades, Russia had been India's most trusted defense partner. Jet engines, missile systems, submarines, helicopters. Russia supplied it all, and India remained a loyal customer. But this time, something different happened, something Vladimir Putin did not expect. India walked away from Russia's most ambitious next-generation fighter jet, the SU-57 Felon. And this rejection has turned into one of the biggest embarrassments for Moscow's defense credibility in years. To understand why India's refusal became such a global humiliation for Russia, we need to go deep into the reality behind the SU-57. When Russia first announced this fighter, it was marketed as the answer to America's F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II. It was supposed to be the pride of Russian aerospace engineering, a fifth-generation stealth monster capable of dominating future air warfare. But what stood on paper never fully materialized in reality. Over the years, reports emerged about structural weaknesses, engine failures, radar inconsistencies, and issues with stealth coatings that peeled off under high-speed conditions. Even within Russia, test pilots raised concerns about reliability. And for India, a country with rising global ambitions and increasing strategic responsibilities, such flaws became impossible to ignore. India's involvement in the project began as the FGFA program, the fifth-generation fighter aircraft initiative, a joint effort between Russia's Sukhoi and India's Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. India was promised technology transfer, co-development rights, and access to critical stealth materials. And billions of dollars were supposed to be invested, and the world believed the two countries were on track to create powerful fifth-generation fighter together. But year after year, India found itself asking questions, and Russia struggling to provide answers. Why were the engines still unreliable? Why were the stealth characteristics below expectations? Why was Russia unwilling to share sensitive technologies despite promising full cooperation? The partnership became strained, and the reality of the SU-57's limitations became impossible to hide. By 2018, India froze the FGFA project, but Russia continued to lobby aggressively, hoping that India would eventually return. Fast forward to 2025, and Putin made multiple diplomatic pushes urging India to reconsider the SU-57. Moscow viewed India not only as a customer but as a crucial partner who could validate the SU-57 globally. If the Indian Air Force adopted the jet, it would give the SU-57 international credibility, something no country had provided so far. Russia desperately needed that validation, because no major air force in the world, not even China, agreed to buy the aircraft. Even Russia itself had only a small number in active service. And so, when India outright rejected the SU-57 again, it wasn't just a no. It was humiliation on the global stage. Inside the Indian Air Force, the analysis was clear. The SU-57 failed to meet India's performance expectations. Reliability issues remained unresolved. Russia had still not perfected the second stage engine, the very heart of a fifth-generation aircraft. Without it, the SU-57 was just a fourth-generation jet with stealth features, not a true competitor to the world's leading fighters. Then there were concerns about Russia's economic stability, its ongoing war expenditures, and its shrinking ability to maintain long-term defense programs. The IIF wanted an aircraft that would last 40 years. Moscow could not guarantee that level of support. And India, now emerging as a key player in the Indo-Pacific with no long ties to the United States, Europe, and Japan, could no longer invest in a platform that before entering full service. Meanwhile, global geopolitics added more pressure. The US had begun offering India deeper cooperation, on the F-21, F-35, and even sixth-generation technologies under the Next-Generation Air Dominance framework. France offered joint development of the AMCA engine. The UK and Japan started courting India for future fighter collaborations. Suddenly India, independent on Russian dasware, was being invited into elite aviation circles, abetted into elite aviation work. For Moscow, this was a nightmare. Losing India meant losing access to one of the world's largest and most influential defense markets. And beyond the financial loss, there was something even more damaging: the symbolic defeat. A message was sent to the world. India, a frontline air power, had judged the SU-57 unfit for modern warfare. Russia tried to downplay India's decision. Kremlin-backed media outlets claimed India would eventually return, or that the SU-57 was years ahead of NATO. But defense analysts across the world rejected these claims. Satellite images from Russian bases revealed limited production. Open-source intelligence confirmed the jet's troubled service history, and leaked documents from internal Russian sources showed severe problems with avionics cooling systems, low stealth efficiency from certain angles, and an unstable supply chain for critical components. Moreover, Russia's isolation due to sanctions meant it could not acquire high-performance semiconductors needed for next-generation avionics. All these factors only strengthened India's belief that the SU-57 was not the future. As India rejected the SU-57, something else became clear. New Delhi was shifting toward self-reliance. The Indian-made AMCA project, the Tehas Make-2, and new technological partnerships indicated a future in which India would produce its own fifth and sixth-generation jets. This new reality directly threatened Russia's defense export model. For decades, Russia relied on selling weapons to India. Now, India was not only rejecting Russia's most advanced jet, but also preparing to outgrow Russian hardware entirely. For Putin, this was not just painful, it was politically embarrassing. The Kremlin had been telling the world that Russia was still a leading global military power. But India's move exposed a truth Moscow wanted to hide. Russia's defense technology had fallen behind. India's rejection also signaled a new stage in its strategic thinking. Instead of being bound to a single defense supplier, New Delhi adopted a multi-aligned approach. It strengthened ties with the US but avoided becoming an American ally. It bought Rafales from France, drones from Israel, artillery systems from South Korea, and now explored joint jet development with multiple nations. This new India was unpredictable, independent, and unwilling to compromise on quality. And Putin, who expected loyalty based on history, underestimated how much India had changed. The world had changed. Wars had changed. Defense alliances had changed. And India was no longer willing to be held back by sentiment or legacy partnerships. When news leaked that India had communicated a firm no to purchasing the Su-57, global defense media, immediately Putinalists, called it the American anal nail in the coffin for the filen nail ex-analyst, felon export potential. European defense officials viewed it as confirmation that Russia's aerospace industry had lost its competitive edge. Chinese experts expressed concern because China's own stealth jet, the J-20, relied heavily on Russian engines. If Russia couldn't fix the SU-57 engine, what did it mean for China's future fleet? Even within Russia, nationalist commentators criticized the government for overselling its military capabilities. The humiliation was visible everywhere, not because India rejected a fighter jet, but because India's rejection exposed years of Russian exaggeration. India's decision also impacted regional power balances. With Pakistan increasingly dependent on Chinese aircraft and China investing in its J-20 and J-31 programs, India needed a fifth-generation jet quickly, but New Delhi concluded that relying on Russia would delay its modernization. Instead, India moved toward Western collaborations and domestic innovations. This shift aligned with the Indo-Pacific security framework supported by the US, Japan, Australia, and France. And, for Moscow, this alignment carried deeper geopolitical consequences. As India drifted closer to the West, Russia found itself more dependent on China. Losing India meant losing strategic autonomy, and Putin knew it. Behind the scenes, Moscow made multiple attempts to convince India one last time. Diplomatic pressure increased. Russian officials highlighted the SU-57's upgrades, new avionics, and combat experience in Ukraine. They promised better technology transfer, faster delivery timelines, and discounted pricing. But these offers came too late. India's defense establishment had already concluded that the SU-57 did not meet its requirements. And beyond the technical weaknesses, India no longer trusted Russia's ability to sustain long-term military commitments. Sanctions, economic instability, and battlefield losses had strained Russia's defense manufacturing system to its limit. India could not afford to gamble its air superiority on a platform surrounded by uncertainties. The final blow came when India publicly announced its procurement roadmap, with zero mention of the SU-57. Western experts immediately interpreted it as a direct rejection. Russian state media went silent, Kremlin diplomats avoided the topic, and inside Moscow, the narrative shifted from confidence to damage control. Putin, who once hoped India would revive the SU-57's reputation, now faced the reality that one of Russia's largest defense partners had openly walked away. The global message was loud and clear. If India, a country with decades of experience operating Russian jets, refused the SU-57, why would any other nation buy it? The rejection became a case study in military modernization. It demonstrated that even long-term alliances cannot compensate for outdated technology. It proved that geopolitical loyalty cannot replace high-performance engineering. And most importantly, it marked a turning point in India's rise as a global defense power. India's refusal also revitalized debates about the emerging future of air combat. Could Russia keep up with emerging generation battlefields? Would Western jets dominate future battlefields? Would India succeed in building its own stealth fighter? Analysts around the world discussed how India's decision accelerated competition in the Indo-Pacific. With China rapidly expanding its air force and the West increasing its presence in the region, India's strategic partnerships became critical, and by rejecting the SU-57, India sent a signal it would invest only in systems capable of shaping tomorrow's air dominance, not yesterday's outdated promises, not tomorrow's dated promises. Meanwhile, Russia continued to showcase the SU-57 in air shows, military demonstrations, and promotional videos. But the perception had already shifted. Footage of the jet flying low or firing missiles no longer impressed countries that questioned the jet's underlying capabilities. India's refusal had planted doubt, and in defense markets, doubt is deadly. Russia struggled to find serious buyers. Nations in Southeast Asia flirted with the idea, but backed away after India's analysis became public. African nations lacked the budget. Middle Eastern buyers preferred American and European jets. The SU-57 slowly transformed from a symbol of Russian resurgence to a reminder of its limitations. As months passed, India moved ahead with its own fighter projects. The Tejas Mach 2 neared testing. The AMCA program gained momentum. Partnerships with France and the US deepened, and Russia watched as India built a future that no longer depended on Moscow's factories. The symbolic weight of this shift was enormous. For almost 60 years, India was Russia's anchor in the global defense market. Now that anchor had come loose, and the world witnessed a quiet but undeniable decline in Russia's influence. The story doesn't end with India's rejection. It begins with what it represents, a changing world order. a new era in defense technology, and the rise of India as a confident, independent, and uncompromising military power. For Putin, the rejection of the Su-57 was more than losing a customer. It was losing a narrative, the narrative that Russia still competed head-to-head with the world's strongest air forces. India's decision stripped away that illusion and revealed the truth beneath it. The world no longer judged Russia by its bold claims, but by the judgment of a major military power that evaluated the Su-57 and said, "No, this isn't good enough." And in the realm of geopolitics, that single no echoed across every capital, every defense ministry, and every battlefield strategist watched India explosively. India had spoken, and the world listened.